Daniel Carter was known by many people as a powerful and successful businessman. He had built his company from nothing and turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire. Newspapers often wrote about his smart decisions and strong leadership. People admired how disciplined he was and how he never allowed emotions to interfere with his work. To the outside world, Daniel looked like a man who had everything: money, respect, luxury homes, expensive cars, and influence in the business world. But behind his success, there was a quiet emptiness in his personal life that he rarely allowed himself to notice. Daniel had lost his father when he was still young. After his father passed away, he made a promise to himself that he would become strong and successful so his family would never struggle financially again. He worked day and night, sometimes forgetting to eat or sleep properly. Over the years, his hard work paid off. His company grew quickly, and he became one of the youngest millionaires in the city. However, while chasing success, Daniel slowly started drifting away from emotional relationships, including his bond with his mother, Margaret Carter. Margaret was once a warm, cheerful woman who loved spending time with her family. She had supported Daniel through every difficult moment of his early life. She encouraged him when he felt weak and reminded him to stay kind and humble no matter how successful he became. When Daniel's father died, Margaret became both a mother and father figure to him. She worked hard to raise him and always made sure he never felt alone. But as Daniel grew older and became busy with business, their conversations became shorter and less frequent. As time passed, Margaret's health began to decline. She developed mobility problems and needed regular medical attention. Daniel wanted to make sure she received the best treatment possible. Instead of moving her into his large luxury home, he decided to place her in one of the most expensive nursing homes in the city. The facility was famous for its high-quality services, professional doctors, comfortable rooms, and beautiful surroundings. Daniel believed this was the best and most practical decision he could make for her care. When he first moved Margaret into the nursing home, he promised he would visit her often. In the beginning, he tried to keep that promise. He visited her a few times during the first few months, bringing flowers and gifts. Margaret always smiled when she saw him, but she never asked him to stay longer even though she secretly wished he would. Daniel usually stayed for short visits because he always had meetings, phone calls, or urgent business matters waiting for him. Gradually, Daniel's visits became less frequent. His company started expanding internationally, and his schedule became even busier. Weeks turned into months without him seeing his mother in person. Instead, he sent money to the nursing home to make sure she had everything she needed. He often told himself that financial support was the most important thing he could provide. In his mind, he was being responsible and practical. He convinced himself that the trained staff at the nursing home could take better care of her than he could. Margaret never complained about Daniel's absence. Whenever he called her, she spoke kindly and proudly about his achievements. She told the nurses and other residents how hardworking and successful her son was. She kept his childhood photos near her bed and often looked at them when she felt lonely. Even though she missed him deeply, she did not want to disturb his busy life. Daniel rarely thought about his mother's loneliness. His daily routine was filled with meetings, business deals, travel, and social events with other wealthy investors. He lived in a large modern mansion, but he often returned home late at night when the house felt quiet and empty. Sometimes he looked at old family photos but quickly pushed those emotions away, focusing again on work. He believed that emotions could weaken a person and distract them from success. The nursing home staff respected Daniel because he paid generously and always made sure his mother received premium services. Margaret had a beautiful private room with a balcony view of a garden. She received regular medical checkups, special meals, and comfortable living conditions. From the outside, it looked like she had everything she needed. But what no one could measure was the emotional distance growing between mother and son. Margaret spent most of her days sitting near the window, watching the garden and remembering the days when Daniel was a little boy who would run to her after school, excited to share stories about his day. She remembered cooking his favorite meals and helping him with homework. Those memories gave her comfort, but they also reminded her of how much life had changed. Daniel never realized how much his mother missed him. He believed he was fulfilling his duty as a son by providing financial security. He did not understand that Margaret valued his time and presence more than luxury or expensive care. For Daniel, success had become his identity, and he thought he was doing the right thing. But deep inside, there was a growing emotional gap that he had not yet noticed, a distance that would soon change his life forever. Daniel was in the middle of finalizing a huge business deal when his phone rang. The ringtone startled him, cutting through the hum of his office filled with chatter and ringing phones. He glanced at the screen and saw the name of the nursing home where his mother lived. A knot formed in his stomach. He hadn't expected a call from them today. Normally, they sent updates via email, and Daniel barely glanced at them. Something in the urgency of the voice on the other end made him sit down slowly, gripping the edge of his polished desk. "Mr. Carter, I'm calling from Greenfield Nursing Home regarding your mother, Margaret Carter. We need you to come immediately," said the nurse, her voice calm, but with an undertone of concern. Daniel's mind raced. Margaret had been stable during his last check-in, at least according to the staff. He asked a few questions, trying to hide his rising anxiety, but the nurse's careful tone suggested this was not just another minor issue. Without hesitation, Daniel canceled his appointments, telling his assistants that everything could wait. His heart beat faster than it had in years. He was used to making quick decisions in the boardroom, but this was different. This was his mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Suddenly, all the business deals, the meetings, and the endless calls felt meaningless compared to the worry gnawing at his chest. By the time Daniel arrived at the nursing home, the sun was dipping low in the sky, casting long golden rays through the tall windows. The building smelled of antiseptic mixed with faint traces of flowers from the garden. He walked briskly down the corridor, his shoes echoing on the polished floor. Margaret's room was at the end of a quiet hallway, and Daniel's footsteps faltered as he approached the door. Inside, he found his mother sitting in her favorite chair by the window. She looked frail, smaller than he remembered, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. A weak smile spread across her face, but there was something different, a mix of relief and quiet pride that Daniel couldn't quite place. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "You came." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hand in his. Her skin felt thin, delicate, like fine parchment. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of time pressing down on him. He noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes searched his face for comfort. It was a painful reminder that life had moved on while he had been building empires. "I'm here, Mom. I'm here," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Margaret's eyes shone with unshed tears, but she didn't ask for anything, not for help, not for attention. Instead, she began speaking about someone Daniel had never expected to hear about, a young waitress named Emily. She talked about Emily's gentle manner, the way she patiently listened to Margaret's stories, and how she brought little treats to her room when no one else was around. Daniel listened quietly, a knot tightening in his stomach. How could a waitress care more for his mother than he had in months? Margaret went on, her voice filled with warmth. "She reminded me of someone from long ago," she said. "Someone who showed me kindness when I needed it most." Daniel tried to hide the sting of guilt creeping into his heart. All these years, he had assumed that providing the best financial care was enough. He had thought luxury rooms, medical checkups, and expensive meals would replace his presence. But now, he realized something important was missing: his time, his love, his attention. As the evening wore on, Daniel stayed by her side, listening to her speak about Emily. He noticed how his mother's eyes brightened whenever she mentioned her name. The simplicity of Emily's care, the genuine concern she showed, had filled a void Daniel hadn't even noticed existed. For the first time in years, he felt like an outsider looking in on something precious that had been happening right under his nose. By the time Daniel left the nursing home that night, he was no longer just a businessman on autopilot. Something inside him had shifted. The thought of Emily and the care she had given his mother made him wonder how many other moments of love and kindness he had missed while chasing success. He didn't know what surprises awaited him in the coming days, but he knew one thing: this visit had changed him forever. The next morning, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what his mother had said. Emily, the young waitress who worked at the nursing home, had captured Margaret's heart in a way he never had. The thought both puzzled and intrigued him. How could a stranger, someone who wasn't family, provide the comfort and care he had failed to give? He found himself turning over the words in his mind again and again, as if by repeating them, he could understand how this had happened. Unable to ignore his curiosity, Daniel decided he needed to see Emily for himself. He arrived at the nursing home earlier than usual, walking down the familiar corridor with a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. Every step echoed in his mind. He had dealt with employees, clients, and business rivals in his life, but approaching someone to understand how they cared for his mother was unfamiliar territory. He finally found Emily in the small cafeteria, arranging plates of food for the residents. She moved with a quiet efficiency, smiling at the elderly men and women as she set their meals in front of them. There was a gentle patience in her movements, a calmness that seemed to put everyone at ease. Daniel observed from a distance, his curiosity turning into admiration. There was something different about her, something he hadn't expected to find in a place like this. Kindness, sincerity, and a warmth that filled the room. Daniel cleared his throat and approached her. Emily looked up, startled for a moment, but then she smiled politely. "Good morning, sir," she said, her voice soft yet confident. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said, feeling slightly awkward. "I wanted to speak with you about my mother." Emily's expression didn't change, but there was a calm understanding in her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Carter. She's been wonderful to care for," she replied. As they talked, Daniel noticed something striking. Emily didn't speak like someone who was doing her job out of obligation or for money. She spoke with genuine care, as though being there for Margaret was not just a responsibility, but a privilege. She recounted little moments. The time she read Margaret's favorite book aloud when she was lonely, how she brought her favorite tea when the nursing home ran out, and how she would sit quietly by Margaret's side during the nights when sleep seemed impossible. Daniel listened, slowly realizing that he had never truly paid attention to these small gestures in his own life. He had assumed that love could be measured in material things, in expensive gifts, luxurious surroundings, and endless financial security. But here was Emily, offering something he couldn't buy: patience, presence, and a heart willing to give without expectation. Margaret's face appeared in his mind, the way she had smiled and praised Emily. Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on doing what he thought was practical that he had missed the emotional connection his mother longed for. Emily, a young stranger, had filled a space in Margaret's life that he had left empty. Emily then shared something that left Daniel even more astonished. She spoke about how Margaret had always treated her with respect and kindness, even when Emily had been new, unsure, and nervous. Emily admitted that she had grown attached to Margaret, not just out of duty, but out of genuine affection. Each act of care had come from her heart. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions: awe, guilt, and curiosity. He realized that Emily had quietly become part of his mother's life in a way he never had. She had been there when he couldn't. She had listened when he hadn't. She had cared when he had ignored. And now, Daniel found himself wanting to understand her story, to know why she had gone so far out of her way for a woman she barely knew. Before leaving, he thanked Emily, but his voice carried a new emotion, a humility he rarely showed. "Thank you for everything you've done for her," he said, unable to hide the sincerity. Emily simply nodded, her smile calm, almost knowing. As Daniel walked out of the cafeteria, his mind was racing. Who was Emily really? Why had she cared so deeply for someone she didn't even know? And most importantly, what would his mother reveal next about this extraordinary young woman who had stolen Daniel's attention and admiration in ways he hadn't anticipated? For the first time in years, Daniel felt that familiar emptiness inside him stirring. But this time, it wasn't business or money that could fill it. It was understanding, connection, and a lesson in human kindness he had almost forgotten. He knew that what came next would change everything, not just for him, but for the way he viewed his mother, the people around him, and even himself. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Emily. Her presence in his mother's life lingered in his mind like a puzzle he needed to solve. On one hand, he felt gratitude. She had cared for Margaret when he hadn't. On the other hand, a small, nagging voice in his head questioned her motives. Why would a young waitress go out of her way for someone she barely knew? Was it really kindness, or was there something more? Daniel had spent his life analyzing people, predicting their moves, and calculating their intentions. Now, he was facing a situation he couldn't quantify. The next morning, he decided to observe Emily more closely. He told the nursing home staff he wanted to spend time with his mother, and while Margaret enjoyed his company, Daniel's attention was elsewhere. From a distance, he watched Emily move through the halls. She greeted each resident by name, helped a man adjust his wheelchair, and knelt beside a woman who seemed confused, whispering words of comfort. Daniel's chest tightened. She was genuinely caring, that much was clear, but he still needed answers. After his mother rested, Daniel asked Emily to speak privately in the small lounge. Emily looked hesitant but agreed, her eyes calm and trusting. Daniel cleared his throat and leaned forward. Emily, I have to ask something. Why do you care so much about my mother? You barely know her. There's no reason for you to go above and beyond like this. Emily's expression softened, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. She looked down at her hands for a moment before speaking. Mr. Carter, I've spent time with many residents here. Some are kind, some are difficult, but your mother, she's different. She treated me with respect, always spoke to me kindly. I've never met someone so genuine, and I wanted to make her days brighter. That's all. Daniel listened carefully, his skepticism battling with the truth in her voice. She sounded sincere, almost painfully honest, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He had spent decades building businesses, negotiating deals, and uncovering hidden motives. He couldn't ignore the possibility that Emily had a reason he didn't yet understand. Emily, there's something I need to know, he said, leaning closer. There's more to this, isn't there? Why do you care so much? There has to be a reason I don't know about. Emily paused, biting her lips slightly. Her fingers twisted nervously. I can't say everything yet. It's complicated. But I promise, everything I've done for your mother comes from my heart. I've never wanted anything in return. Her words only made Daniel more curious. He had spent his life uncovering the hidden stories behind people's actions, and he could sense that Emily was holding back something important. The thought made his pulse quicken. What could she possibly be hiding? As they spoke, Margaret's soft voice interrupted them. She smiled at Daniel, her eyes twinkling with a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. Daniel, one day, you'll understand everything about Emily. She has a story to tell you, one that will change the way you see things. Daniel's heart raced. A story that would change everything? What could it be? His mind raced with possibilities, each more shocking than the last. He had assumed he knew all there was to know about his mother, about the people around her, and about the life he had built. But now, he realized that the truth was much more complex, and he was standing on the edge of discovering it. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and fear. He had faced financial risks, business rivalries, and life-or-death decisions, but nothing compared to the anticipation of uncovering Emily's secret. He realized he had been living in a bubble, thinking that money and status could solve everything. Now, he was confronted with something priceless: human emotion, loyalty, and a hidden connection that he didn't yet understand. That evening, Daniel left the nursing home with a restless mind. He kept replaying every interaction, Margaret's hints, Emily's careful words, the way the waitress cared for his mother. A single thought dominated his mind. The truth was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. The businessman, the millionaire, the self-made success who had always believed he could control life, suddenly felt powerless, in the best possible way. Daniel realized that he was no longer just observing. He was waiting, and the revelation that Emily was holding back would soon shake the foundation of everything he thought he knew about kindness, loyalty, and family. The next day, Daniel returned to the nursing home with a heavy heart. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily and the strange tension in his mother's eyes when she mentioned her. Something about the way Margaret spoke hinted at a story she had been keeping secret for years, a story Daniel was suddenly desperate to hear. He found Margaret sitting by the window, the sunlight falling gently across her silver hair. She looked calm, but there was a certain seriousness in her expression that made Daniel pause at the door. "Daniel," Margaret said softly, motioning for him to come closer. "Sit with me for a moment. There's something I need to tell you, something important about Emily." Daniel's pulse quickened. He knelt beside her chair, taking her frail hand in his. He could feel the warmth, the steady beat of her pulse, and the love she had always carried, even when he hadn't noticed it. "Mom, what is it?" he asked quietly, afraid of interrupting a story that might change everything. Margaret took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment. "Years ago, before your father passed, we were going through a difficult time. There were people in our lives who needed help, but I never spoke about it, not even to you. One day, a young girl needed help for her mother's medical treatment. I stepped in quietly, without anyone knowing. I wanted to help her family, but I wanted to remain anonymous. Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. You help someone? But who? Margaret opened her eyes and looked at him, her voice trembling slightly. Her name is Emily. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. Emily, the same young waitress who had cared for his mother so devotedly, who had brightened her days and nights. Could it really be the same person? The pieces suddenly started to fall into place, but he was too stunned to speak. Margaret continued, her eyes glistening with tears. I helped her family when she was just a child. Her mother was very sick, and they couldn't afford the treatment. I paid for the medical care anonymously because I wanted to help, without anyone expecting gratitude or recognition. I never imagined that Emily would one day find me again, or that she would dedicate herself to caring for me when I was older. Daniel sat back slightly, trying to process the revelation. The young woman who had shown so much kindness to his mother wasn't just a compassionate stranger. She was repaying a debt of gratitude that had been years in the making. Every action, every little gesture, every meal she had brought, and every night she had stayed to comfort Margaret was part of something far bigger than he had imagined. Mom, she's been looking after you all this time because of you? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. Yes, she never asked for anything in return. All she wanted was to show her gratitude and care. And Daniel, I wanted you to know, because I think you've been blind to the value of small acts of kindness. It's not always money or status that changes a life. Sometimes it's love, patience, and care. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. All these years, he had believed that providing the best care meant paying for the most expensive nursing home, the finest doctors, and luxurious comforts. But in reality, Margaret had received something far more precious, a human connection, empathy, and selfless devotion. And that devotion had come from someone he had once thought was a mere employee, a young waitress with no real ties to their family. For the first time, Daniel truly understood the depth of Emily's character, the sincerity of her heart, and the weight of his own neglect. He realized that he had been chasing success at the expense of emotional bonds that could never be bought. In that moment, he felt a profound mix of gratitude, guilt, and awe. Margaret reached out and touched his cheek softly. Daniel, don't be sad. You've done your best in your way. But now it's time for you to learn another lesson about humility, gratitude, and the power of caring without expectation. Daniel nodded slowly, unable to speak. The story Margaret had revealed would stay with him forever. He now understood why Emily had been such a constant presence in her life. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was a living testament to the kindness his mother had sown years ago. And Daniel realized that the lessons from this story weren't just for him. They were for everyone who believed that wealth could replace love. As he left Margaret's room that day, Daniel knew one thing clearly. He had to meet Emily, thank her properly, and understand the full story of the young woman whose devotion had stunned even the richest man in the city. This revelation would not only change the way he viewed others, but also how he would live the rest of his life. Daniel felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness as he walked toward the nursing home cafeteria that morning. His mind was buzzing with questions. Emily had cared for his mother for months, maybe even years, but now he understood there was a reason far deeper than simple kindness. Margaret's revelation had shaken him to the core. He knew that meeting Emily face-to-face would finally answer the questions he had been struggling with, and perhaps change everything he thought he knew about family, gratitude, and human kindness. Emily was already there when he arrived, arranging the small tables and serving breakfast to the residents. She looked up and smiled politely as Daniel approached, but this time, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, as though she knew something significant was about to happen. Daniel cleared his throat, unsure how to start. Emily, he began, his voice low but firm. I need to understand everything. Why you've cared for my mother so much, and why you've been so devoted. Can you tell me the whole story? Emily hesitated. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her apron. Then she took a deep breath and met his eyes. Mr. Carter, I think it's time you knew the truth, she said quietly. The truth about why I care for your mother. Daniel leaned forward, his heart pounding. He felt as if the room itself had gone silent. All he could hear was the soft hum of the nursing home, and the faint clatter of plates on trays. "When I was a child," Emily began, her voice trembling slightly, "my mother became very sick. She needed expensive medical treatment, and we didn't have the money. I don't know how I would have survived if someone hadn't helped us. One day, your mother, Margaret Carter, paid for all the treatment anonymously. She saved my mother's life, and we never knew who it was at the time." Daniel's eyes widened. His mother had saved this young woman's family? All the pieces started falling into place. He remembered Margaret's soft smile and the quiet pride in her voice when she spoke of Emily. The waitress's devotion wasn't just kindness, it was gratitude. Pure, selfless, deep gratitude. Emily continued, "I didn't know her identity for years. When I found out, I wanted to repay her, not with money, but with care. When I came to work at the nursing home, I realized I could be there for her the way she had been there for my family. Every meal I brought, every story I listened to, every time I stayed by her side, it was my way of saying thank you. I wanted her to feel loved and cared for, the way she had made my mother feel safe when we were desperate." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had always believed he understood people, but now he realized he had underestimated the power of gratitude and human connection. Emily wasn't doing her job for a paycheck. She was honoring a debt of kindness, a life-saving act that had rippled into the present. "Emily, all this time," Daniel's voice shook. "All this care, it wasn't just for my mother. It was because of you and your family?" Emily nodded. "Yes, and I wanted her to feel that love, even if you weren't here. I never expected anything in return. I just wanted to give back what she gave to us." Daniel was stunned into silence. For the first time in years, he felt completely powerless. Money, status, power, none of it mattered in that moment. He realized that everything he had achieved in business couldn't compare to the weight of human kindness, loyalty, and gratitude. Tears welled up in his eyes as he looked at Emily, the young woman whose devotion had quietly transformed his mother's life. He felt overwhelming gratitude, humility, and shame all at once. He had neglected his mother's emotional needs, yet this stranger had filled the void he left behind. "Emily, I don't know what to say," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "You've done more for my mother than I ever could. I need to thank you properly." Emily smiled softly, shaking her head. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Carter. You just need to understand. That's enough." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling a shift inside him. He realized that life wasn't about money, power, or success. It was about love, compassion, and paying forward the kindness you had been shown. Emily's story had opened his eyes to a truth he had long ignored, that the smallest acts of selflessness could change lives in ways no wealth ever could. As he left the cafeteria that day, Daniel carried a new understanding in his heart. He wasn't just a millionaire anymore. He was a son who had finally begun to see the depth of his mother's life, the ripple of her kindness, and the extraordinary power of human gratitude. And he knew that the story wasn't over yet. There were still lessons to learn, and still ways he could honor both his mother and Emily for the incredible bond they had shared. Daniel left the nursing home that evening with his mind swirling and his heart heavy with emotions he hadn't felt in years. As he drove through the quiet streets of the city, he realized that everything he had chased, money, power, success, suddenly seemed smaller, almost meaningless. All his life, he had believed that wealth was the solution to every problem, the answer to every worry. Yet, here was Emily, a young waitress, who had demonstrated more compassion and loyalty than he had ever shown, and for a reason he had never imagined. For the first time, Daniel truly understood what his mother had meant when she spoke about the importance of love, kindness, and human connection. Margaret hadn't just been a mother. She had been a teacher in the truest sense, silently showing the world that small acts of generosity could ripple across lives in ways no one could measure. And now, he had witnessed the evidence of that ripple in Emily's devotion. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept picturing Emily bringing tea to his mother, reading stories aloud, sitting quietly by her bedside when loneliness crept in. He pictured his mother, once strong and vibrant, now fragile and small, smiling at the thought of Emily's care. Guilt gnawed at him. He had been absent, distracted, convinced that money could replace his presence. He realized how often he had ignored the emotional needs of the people he loved, believing that financial security was enough. The next morning, Daniel returned to the nursing home, determined to make things right. He didn't just want to thank Emily. He wanted to show her, and his mother, that he had learned something essential, that kindness and gratitude were priceless. When he arrived, he found Emily helping Margaret into a wheelchair, guiding her toward the sunlit garden. Daniel watched them, his heart aching with admiration and regret. He realized how many moments he had missed, how many small opportunities to connect and love his mother had slipped away unnoticed. Taking a deep breath, Daniel approached Emily and Margaret. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but emotional, "I want to apologize. I've been blind to so much. You've cared for my mother in ways I never did, and I haven't been the son I should have been." Emily looked at him, calm and gentle, her eyes reflecting both understanding and compassion. "It's never too late, Mr. Carter. What matters is what you do now." Daniel nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. For the first time, he realized that gratitude wasn't just about saying thank you. It was about action, showing love, honoring promises, and valuing the people who shape your life. He sat beside his mother and took her hand, holding it gently. "Mom, I'm sorry I wasn't here for you like I should have been. I promise I'll do better." Margaret smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Daniel, it's okay. You've learned. That's what matters. And now, you can carry it forward." Daniel turned to Emily, a newfound resolve shining in his eyes. "Emily, I want to honor you, not just for my mother, but for the incredible person you are. I want to make sure your kindness reaches others, to create opportunities for you to help more people, to inspire more acts of care like the ones you've given my mother." Emily shook her head, touched but hesitant. "I've never wanted recognition or reward. I just wanted to give back." Daniel smiled, tears streaming down his face. "I know, and that's exactly why I want to help you. Because the world needs more people like you, and I've finally learned how important that is." From that day forward, Daniel made a promise to himself and to his mother. He would be more present, more compassionate, and more aware of the lives around him. He realized that true wealth wasn't measured in money or possessions, but in relationships, empathy, and the impact one could have on others. Emily's devotion had taught him a lesson he would carry forever, that acts of love and kindness are never wasted, and sometimes they come back to touch you in ways you never expected. That evening, as Daniel walked through the garden with his mother and Emily, he felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time, he understood what it truly meant to be a son, to be human, and to honor the quiet acts of love that shape our lives. And in that understanding, he found a wealth far greater than any he had ever earned, a wealth of gratitude, connection, and the knowledge that life was far richer when lived with compassion. After that day in the garden, Daniel felt a profound shift in himself. Everything he had believed about life, success, and what truly mattered had changed. Emily's devotion to his mother, Margaret's quiet generosity, and the realization of how little he had been present in their lives had opened his eyes to a new way of living, one that valued love, compassion, and gratitude above all else. Daniel decided it was time to act, not just for his mother, but for everyone who had ever been quietly helped, cared for, or overlooked. He started by spending more time with Margaret, talking with her about the past, sharing stories, and listening to her laughter, the sound he hadn't realized he had missed so deeply. He helped her into the garden every day, where they would sit together, watching the flowers bloom and the birds play in the sunlight. He held her hand as she recounted memories of his childhood, and for the first time, he truly understood her strength, her compassion, and her heart. But Daniel didn't stop there. He wanted to honor Emily's kindness in a way that could touch the lives of others. He offered her a position in a charitable foundation he was creating, designed to support caregivers, elderly residents, and families in need of medical assistance. Emily hesitated, unsure she deserved such recognition, but Daniel explained, "You've already changed my mother's life. Now I want to help you change the lives of many more." She accepted, and together, they began planning programs that would provide care, support, and hope to countless people who needed it most. Through this foundation, Daniel realized something he had never understood before. Money could open doors, but it was human connection and empathy that truly transformed lives. Emily became the heart of the foundation, teaching volunteers how small acts of kindness could ripple through communities. Margaret, though frail, participated as well, sharing her wisdom, her stories, and the lessons she had learned about love, gratitude, and the quiet power of generosity. As the months passed, Daniel noticed a profound change in himself. He was no longer the distant, busy businessman who measured life in deals and profits. He became a son, a mentor, and a leader in a very different way, one defined by empathy, understanding, and the desire to leave the world better than he had found it. He visited his mother every day, supported Emily in her work, and learned to cherish the small moments he had once overlooked. One evening, as Daniel, Margaret, and Emily sat together in the garden, Margaret looked at him and smiled. "Daniel," she said, "I always knew you would understand one day. You just needed to see kindness in action." Daniel nodded, tears in his eyes. "Mom, Emily, thank you. You've taught me more than anyone else ever could. I finally understand that life isn't about what you earn, it's about what you give." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "And now, you'll keep giving, won't you?" "Yes," Daniel whispered, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. "I promise I will." From that day forward, Daniel dedicated himself to honoring the lessons his mother and Emily had taught him. He funded programs for the elderly who had no one to care for them, provided scholarships for young people in need, and supported caregivers who worked tirelessly without recognition. He shared the story of Emily and his mother as an example of how one small act of kindness could ripple across generations. People who met him noticed a change, a warmth in his eyes, a patience in his voice, and a willingness to connect with others that had been missing for decades. Emily, too, found fulfillment beyond anything she had imagined. She had started as a young waitress with a heart full of gratitude, but now she was leading a movement of care and compassion that would touch hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives. And Margaret, watching the two of them work together, felt a quiet pride that filled her heart with joy. In the end, Daniel realized the greatest fortune he had ever earned wasn't in his bank account, his real estate, or his business empire. It was in the love he shared with his mother, the devotion of Emily, and the lessons they had taught him about humanity, gratitude, and the power of kindness. As the sun set over the nursing home garden, Daniel, Margaret, and Emily sat together, holding hands, laughing, and sharing stories. The world outside continued its busy pace, but within that quiet space, 3 lives had been forever transformed by a single act of love, one act that had created a lifetime of gratitude, connection, and hope. And Daniel knew, with every fiber of his being, that this was the richest life he could ever live.